This week I've got two movies that are definitely attempting to be awards contenders, and I think at least one of them will be. The first one is Roma, which is already on Netflix or was part of a Netflix deal, and so you have no excuse not to see this movie. It's by Alfonso Cuaron, and it takes place in the 1970s in Mexico City, and clearly this is a time and an era and a place that he lived through. It is, you know, you can feel the authenticity and the genuineness and just like the very distinct micro moments that you're like, yeah, this is obviously from somebody's memory. This is something that they experience in their life. And I really appreciate it. And I talk a lot about getting frustrated when a movie doesn't have a plot and it also doesn't have progression through it, because I'm like, you don't always have to have an A to B plot, right? But you at least have to give me some sort of development. And this is a movie where there's not necessarily an A to B plot, but there is so much development and each character goes on a journey and the journeys are intertwined and, you know, they're not always super obvious, but you see the things that motivate the changes in these characters. And I was fascinated by it. And the performances are great. Some of the cast are actors and a lot of the cast are not. In fact, one of the main characters is a character named Cleo, and she's played by a woman named Yalitza, who trained to be a teacher. And in fact, might still be a teacher. And I had the chance to talk to her, and she was talking about how, like, she was concerned that this was all like a hoax and that, you know, they were gonna like kidnap her or something awful when she got like a call back, or that, you know, it was some sort of complicated scheme. And I was like, holy crap, like I wouldn't even think about, you know, that being a scary thing or a risk of going on an audition. But that's, you know, the like scope with which they were casting. They wanted authenticity and they absolutely got it. And she's just so natural in this role. And, you know, it's not her experience. So you can't be like, oh yeah, of course she was a housekeeper / babysitter. Of course she fit into the role. No, she is, again, supposed to be a teacher, or is a teacher. So I just really appreciated this film. It was wonderful to see in theaters because the sound design like very much makes you feel like you're there, you know, having it on the big screen. But it's also a movie that could absolutely be enjoyed at home. So I think Roma is really worth checking out. I'm 90% sure it's at least going to win Best Foreign Film at the Oscars. It's going to be hard to contend with because the pedigree, and I don't even want to hear about like, oh, it's a Netflix film, it doesn't count. No, it's a beautiful film. It's worth seeing. It's not speedy, but sometimes it's nice to just take a step back and like enjoy an experience. So I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5. Another film that is very much about a time and a very specific place is If Beale Street Could Talk, which is the follow-up from Barry Jenkins, who did Moonlight, and that was a Best Picture at the Oscars. And it's actually an adaptation of a James Baldwin novel. And look, hearing Barry Jenkins talk about anything is just an awing experience because clearly he is so thoughtful and so well like read and just like has thought about things in his life, and it translates onto screen. Now, I don't know if this one translated as well as Moonlight did, honestly. Like, I loved Moonlight. There's definitely something to be said for the experience. It's a very timely subject matter. It's about a couple, and unfortunately, one of them gets accused of a crime that they did not commit. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff about race. This takes place in the 1970s in Harlem. They're very young. You know, they don't have a ton of money. The race relations aren't exactly the greatest then, and they certainly aren't the greatest now. So in that sense, again, very timely. I feel like we actually saw a lot of movies this year that fit into that kind of timely and probably intentionally so in this case category. It's thoughtful. It's very, very thoughtful. This is a movie that, again, I think the experience is a huge part of it. I think the plot probably impacts it a little bit more or is more of a driving factor in this one. And again, not to say that in Roma, the plot is not, there's not a plot, but there's an incident in it that I think weaves its way through more of it and is a driving force as opposed to the way that Roma kind of braids together incidents and plot points. So I think it's really worth seeing. Look, there are also tough things to watch in this film. And the other thing is, I don't want to talk too much about the plot because I think experiencing it through the way that the characters do, and they convey it so well, right? Like, not a lot of things are telegraphed. It's not super obvious what's going to happen. Or the things that you're like, oh my God, this is coming. Like, there's a reason for that. And the dread it fills you with is very intentional. So, great movie, 4 out of 5.